Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is part of a huge video hop for Save the Crafty YouTuber. This hop has many participants and a ton of prizes along the way. On my channel, I'm giving away a $25 gift certificate to Scrapbook.com. This was purchased by me, and all you have to do to win is leave a comment on this video and let me know which is your favorite card. So anyhow, onto the video. For the technique that I'm focusing on today is creating backgrounds using alcohol inks. And I'm showcasing several different ways that I've created the backgrounds. So the video is just a little bit lengthy, but in the end I have about 6 cards with different techniques that I've used to create them. So for the first card, I've started with a dry piece of Yupo paper, and I've taken several alcohol inks in sort of a sunset color scheme, and I'm adding the colors in layers from the lightest to the darkest, and I'm sort of just adding the colors on a felt pad, and I'm kind of doing a twisting motion to add a line in. So continuing on with the last color, I've switched pads from each one of the colors so that I don't cross-contaminate or mix in some of the colors that will stand out against the background. So once I have that completed, I take a clean felt pad and I'm using the alcohol blending solution, and I've sort of am pouncing in that blending solution to take away any harsh lines and blend in the color from one color to the next. And then I'll go ahead and use another clean pad to clean up that red from the orange, and then finally a new felt pad for the mixing of the colors between the red and the purple. So once I'm happy with the ombre effect that I've got, I can put that card aside to dry and work on the second card. So for this card, the vision I had was that of waves and sort of like the texture and the restlessness the waves would create. So I'm starting with a piece of Yupo paper again, and I've added some blending solution to get the alcohol inks to move. And I've added several drops of teal-ish or bluish color, and then I've smeared it across the entire paper with a paper towel. The reason why I did that was because I wanted a base layer so that there would be no white showing. And now I can work on creating some texture to create waves. So first you saw me tilt my paper up on an angle so that I can create those drip lines, and then I poured a little bit of the blending solution with that paper still tilted so that it kind of just dripped down, and then I took a blue alcohol ink and I dropped a few drops, and again I let that drip down. And then finally, to sort of clean up any harsh lines or add a little bit of texture, I took some alcohol, and I believe this is rubbing alcohol that I took, into a glass jar, and then I took a brush And then I'm just sort of dipping the brush into the alcohol, and I'm going over any harsh lines where the colors meet to create some texture. And if anybody has ever created alcohol ink backgrounds, you know how addictive it is to keep going. And so you can keep adding blending solution, you can drip it on the paper, you can sort of dab it on with a paintbrush. It just depends what you want to do, and at some point you have to tell yourself to stop, because you can ruin a project, but other times you just kind of keep going and you're mesmerized by the effects you're creating. So to complete the background for this card, I took a drop of the alcohol ink and I've added it to my work area, and then I'm just dabbing in my brush and adding color here and there to create these waves. And I forced myself to stop because honestly one can just keep going and going and you'll never get the same effect twice. So for the first two cards that I made, I was very much in control of the technique. I had the control over where the ink moved, how much solution I added. By using some tools, I was able to sort of move the color where I wanted. For this third card, I decided to just let it be, and even though I'm using a straw to control the movement, it's very hard to steer the color in the direction you want, and so you get these wonderful effects of having the color move in the direction it wants, if that makes any sense. So for this next card, and I'm sorry I lost part of the footage, I've seen this technique done in a variety of ways and I thought I'd try it here. And basically all I did was I took a tray and I added some water to it, and then I dropped in my ink color that I chose, and I chose blue, yellow, and green. And then I took a regular piece of cardstock. I believe I used a 110-pound Nina cardstock, and then I just sort of slid it in and out of the water, and those are some of the effects that I got. I love that marble look that came out, and it was very subtle, and I really enjoyed doing that technique. So for this next card, I believe card number 5, I'm starting with a piece of Yupo paper, and I've added some red alcohol ink onto a felt pad, and then I'm sort of doing that twisting, pouncing motion again. And I really wanted the background to be intense for this card, and so it looks a bit like a bloody mess right now, but I promise you in the end it looks great. And so this first layer that I wanted on there, I wanted it sort of uniform. I wanted it, I think I only used 2 different colors of red. And I go back and forth between adding color and adding some blending solution to move things around. And then I sort of blend out any harsh lines with a felt pad. So once I have that first layer done, I took a piece of felt and I've added black to it, and then I went through the entire background and I smushed in just one dot. It looks a little bit like a ladybug right now, but it gets better. And then to break up a little bit of that darkness, I added in just a little bit of the gold mixative. And I did that same thing. I just went through and added it as a polka dot sort of here and there. And then to sort of mix everything and blend everything out, I took a clean felt pad and then I've added some blending solution to that, and I'm still going over everything to do, and I'm doing like a twisting motion. That's the best I can explain it, to sort of, it's a twist and pound motion to blend everything out. And the background for that one came out so wonderful. So for this last card, I wanted a very subtle background. That was what I wanted. What I got in the end was not what I had envisioned, but that's okay, because it, to me, this last card really turned out so beautiful and really unexpected for me. Just in case it wasn't noticeable, I like to have very much control over what I'm doing, and when you're working with alcohol inks, you sort of have to let that control go. And this was one of those cards that I started out with a certain technique, and I ended up just throwing everything on there and letting the alcohol inks do what they are meant to do. So first I started by taking a really small cup, and I've added some blending solution with a drop or two of alcohol ink, and then I poured it over my paper. I did that several times with varying amounts of blending solution to ink ratio to achieve this very fluid effect on the background. So once I was happy with the amount of ink on my background, I used a brush and dipped it in the solution mixture to soften any harsh lines and create some texture. I continued adding ink directly from the bottle and then blending it out with the brush. And I did that a few times to create this splotchy textured background. I took just a tiny bit of white alcohol ink and I added it to my mixture, and then I used the brush to add that here and there. And then I continued working on the background to remove any harsh lines until I was really happy with the outcome. So here are all the backgrounds that I've done, and they're all so different. I really enjoyed using my alcohol inks again. So typically I seal all of the alcohol ink backgrounds, and I'm using this one is a micro glaze from Tim Holtz. And it's just a water resistant sealer that I add to my backgrounds. I'm using a clean pad, and I've smushed a little bit of the glaze onto the mat, and then I'm just blending it over the entire background, and then I'll set that aside to dry. So to create some cards from these backgrounds, for this first one, the ombre sunset background, I'm gonna cut it down to 4.5 by 5.25, or I think just a little bit less. And I'm using a die from Spellbinders. This one's called Away We Go. I've die cut the image from some black cardstock, and I've die cut several pieces so that I can stack them and make them a little bit more sturdier. And then I'll use my Lawn Fawn glue tube, and I'll add those on and stack them together. So once I have those on, I can take some fun foam, and I take some black fun foam, and I'll add that to all of the images so that I can create a little bit of dimension and prop them up. So I've stamped a sentiment directly onto the background, and I feel it gets a little bit lost in the boldness of that background. So off camera, I go back and I restamp the sentiment, and the sentiment that I'm using is from Altenew, and it's called Sentiments and Quotes, and it reads, "Your kindness makes such a difference." And off camera, I stamp that onto a piece of black cardstock, and then I white heat emboss that and just add it over that spot where I've stamped it originally. For the second card, I'm using several Spellbinder dies. I will have all of the products I used listed down below in case you're interested as to what I used to create these cards. So anyhow, for this card, I'm working on the sentiment right now, and I'm using a happy birthday sentiment. I'm going to stamp that onto a piece of vellum. I'm using Versamark ink, and I've treated the vellum with some anti-static powder so that I don't get any of those stray powders. And then I'll add some of the gold embossing powder, and I will heat set that. Then I use a stitched scallop die, and I cut out the sentiment, and I'm going to place that in the center of my card. And since I worked really hard on that background, I don't want too much of it to be covered up. I really want to see those colors. So I take a piece of black cardstock, and I'm going to add that to my card base. And it's just me, my personal preference, but I typically only use white card bases. So if I want a different mat, I just go ahead and cut that and cover it over the white card base. So those Spellbinder dies are quite intricate, and instead of cutting several layers and building up the dimension, I just use black fun foam and I die cut those, and they cut fine. And then I can just go ahead and adhere that to my card base. So for the next set of cards, or next card, these are the backgrounds I made using alcohol, inks, and water. And I'm gonna take this adorable Alice in Wonderland image, and my favorite story from my childhood has always been Alice in Wonderland. So when I saw this stamp, I had to have it. Anyhow, I cut one of the backgrounds down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and then I took some glitter cardstock and I made a frame out of it. And this is just going to be really simple card, just showcasing the background and that image. And then I'll pop that image up a little bit on some foam tape. And once I have that adhered, I can peel the backing off and add that to my card. And the sentiment comes from the stamp set, and I've stamped it out and just fussy cut it, and I tried really hard to get it lined up, but in the end I had to take out the this morning part and just change it up a little bit. So for this next card, this was the one that I created using the dripping with the tilted paper. To put this card together, I'm using an image of a mermaid from Hero Arts that I've colored and die cut off screen to save a little bit of time. I've also stamped and white heat embossed the sentiment onto a piece of black cardstock. And then I'm using some foam tape to pop up my elements and add some dimension, and then I can adhere all those down to my alcohol ink card base. And to finish this card off, I'm using some Your Next Stamp clear enamel gumdrops to mimic the bubbles in the ocean. So this was that bloody looking mess of a background, and I really love how this one turned out. There's so much texture, there's so much variation in the colors that I used. I really love how this one turned out. So to add just a little bit of sparkle to this card, I used some glittery black cardstock, and I've got the red panel cut down just on the sides where the black cardstock will peek through. I've used another image from the Visible Image. This one is Queen of Hearts, which I've colored and die cut off screen. And then the sentiment I stamped using white embossing powder, and I've added all of those elements with some fun foam, and I adhered it to my background. Really simple, but I think really stunning for that card. So for this last background that I did, I'm using a Simon Says stamp. This image comes from one of the card kits in the past few months. I'll try to link down below which month that was. And so I'm trying my hand at alcohol lift ink, and I've used the alcohol lift ink and I've stamped it over my image, and then I peeled it off, and I'm gonna use a paper towel to wipe away the ink. Now for me, I felt that this wasn't bold enough and I was losing a lot of the detail from that stamp image. So plan B was to white heat emboss that image, and fingers crossed this was either going to go really good or really bad. So I've used my there was me crossing my fingers. I've used the Versamark, and I've stamped that image directly down, and then I'm adding some white embossing powder. And I've heat set it, and it worked out beautifully. I had to make sure that my heat gun was nice and warm, and I moved really fast. I feared that I would melt the background or melt the paper or warp it, and so I moved really fast, but it worked really well. So to finish this card off, I've used a penny black die to create a frame out of some white cardstock, and then I've popped that up with some fun foam, and I'm adhering it flat to my card, and I trimmed the extra pieces off. And I chose not to add a sentiment for this card because I felt it would take away from just the beauty of that card. So I left it as is. So there are all my cards that I made. Let me know which one was your favorite. And thanks so much for watching and hopping along. I'll have the next participant linked down below, as well as the coordinating blog post in case you're interested for some close-up photos. Don't forget to leave a comment down below for your chance to win a $25 gift card from Scrapbook.com provided by me. If you're new, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so that you're notified the next time I upload new content. As always, I really appreciate you guys commenting and liking my videos, and I'll catch you on the next one.